And we are live. Good evening, everyone. I am the Mad Computer Scientist. On this channel, I normally discuss math, computer science, and technology topics that are of interest. Excuse me, the mic is in the wrong place. Let us restart that. Good evening, everyone. I am the Mad Computer Scientist. On this channel, I normally discuss math, computer science, and technology topics that are of interest to me. However, on Fridays, I like to do a little something different, have a little fun, and maybe respond to something I think is faulty logic snarkily. Now, fortunately, if you're unfamiliar with Nephilim Free, I don't think I've ever heard him say anything that was logical or correct. The closest thing I've heard to him being correct was when he said that some sort of organic construct can be used to make OR gates, or rather has the properties of OR gates. He thought that was the same thing as them being OR gates rather than OR gates being something we ourselves construct as a way to do Boolean logic. Now, I am going to be perfectly honest, this is not the video I planned to do tonight. I did have something entirely different in mind, but I forgot to bookmark it and lost what I had. So we're going to do something that is last minute, and the reason I wasn't sure I would be here tonight is because I thought I would be at a football game, but it looks like it got rained out. Normally I do not go to football games, but in this case I was invited by someone.
Excuse me. Okay, so I am live with a special guest, Sal Giardina, and he. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He is an ordained Christian minister. He has a professional background in engineering and applied sciences.
And I haven't heard one thing yet that makes him an expert on geology.
Let me mute that. Okay, there we go. He has a master's degree, a BS degree in mechanical engineering, a master's degree in geology.
There we go.
He is an air transport pilot, a former registered professional geology consultant for the state of Arizona. He is a university instructor and curriculum developer. He instructed undergraduate geology courses at Syracuse University and Wayland Baptist University. He is the author of 4th through 12th grade science curriculum. He is a ground school aircraft systems instructor for professional pilots. He has developed web-based online training programs approved by the FAA. He is a Boeing aircraft flight instructor. He is the author of In the Beginning, God or Dirt. He has 8 professional publications in engineering geology, and he is the co-author of more than 20 technical reports for industry, private firms, and the United States Nuclear Regulatory Agency. So very pleased to have you with us. Thanks for coming. Tell us something about geology that will cause people, Sal, to doubt uniformitarianism is true.
Why would anything about uniformitarianism cause me to doubt? Sorry. Why would anything about geology cause me to doubt the idea that uniformitarianism, which I cannot pronounce, is true? I believe uniformitarianism, which I can pronounce now for some reason, is just the idea that the laws of nature were the same in the past as they are today. Now, I don't believe they hold solely to uniformitarianism in geology, but I am not a geologist, and that's not why we're watching the stream. So let's continue.
What would you say to someone who says the Earth is billions of years old and the millions of years of rock record on this Earth verify we have all the evidence for evolution and the deep time is there? What do you say to that, Sal?
Well, people have been indoctrinated now for over 150 years with the idea of...
Does that mean the video is not playing? I assure you, because it's Nephilim Free and Sal Giardina, you have missed nothing, but let me double check. It could have been a mistake when I shared it.
Of deep time and uniformitarianism wrapped up in the so-called geologic column. And it's not always so easy to explain to people that much of what secular
If he's not going to get to any math, I'm going to have to invite a geologist in.
geology is teaching today is really inaccurate. However, that's the premise that creation.
You know, there's nothing I love more than a video where everyone talks so slowly and in a monotone voice, because it really holds my interest.
Geologists teach. Our basis is scripture, first of all. Our foundation is scripture. And then from there, we look at the earth, as it says in Romans 1:20, that the entire creation shows the glory of God, and that his attributes are seen by what has been made. Therefore, you're without an excuse. So,
You know, I don't know if you're aware of this, Sal, but the Bible is not a geology textbook. The only thing the Bible might be useful for as a textbook is for a Christian theology class. I might have to. These guys are going slow. I have increased it to 1.25. You are welcome.
so the natural world does conform to scripture, and that's what we attempt to do, is to show people that the actual physical.
The natural world conforms to Scripture. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there a verse, I think it's in Joshua, where the sun stays in the sky just so someone can win a battle? That is the natural world not conforming to Scripture.
Physical facts, not the hype and the theory, actually points to the reality of scripture, the timeline that's in scripture of a relatively young earth, as well as the fact that
All right, well, if you've seen my messages, or rather my community notes, I actually did some math on this relatively recently. That is not a bad statement, Stephanie Elms. And using the formula, which I'll put in chat here, I actually did the math to find out how long it would take to go from 2 people, if we assume the Garden of Eden is true, to 250 million. And that would take about 46,609 years. Now, if you're an astute Bible reader, you may have noticed that there is another bottleneck event mentioned in the Bible, and that's Noah's flood, where we have a population of 8. So I actually did the math for that one as well, using the same formula, and of course, there's only a difference of 3,000 years, because it would take about 43,143 years to go from a population of 8 to the population of 250 million that existed at the time of Christ. Now, this was fairly easy because the population growth rate throughout most of human history, up until about the 1700s, is 0.04%. So, no, Sal, the math doesn't hold with your timeline either. But at least you're only off by 1 order of magnitude. That's closer than creationists usually get.
there was a worldwide geologic flood, which explains most of the geology landforms that we see today on the earth.
Yes, yes, indeed. Couldn't agree more. So one of the most interesting things that I think has been discovered in the
Is that because you've already accepted the Bible as true, and this may be a little confirmation bias sneaking in to feel them?
last, well, going back to the 50s, from some of the things I've read, is the erosion rate of the continental erosion and the coastal erosion rates that have been measured by geologists provide numbers that are definitely not concordant with the idea of uniformitarianism. Isn't that true? So,
yes, that's absolutely true. This is not arm waving by creation scientists and geologists.
No, what I heard was an impressive word salad from Nephilim Free. And I'm amazed that you can come up with a coherent answer to that.
For over 50 years, well over 50 years, measurements have been taken on the worldwide erosion rates around the world. This is not a few measurements, helter-skelter here or there. This has been going on for a long time. There are many.
And this is something I am willing to believe is true broadly speaking. However, I don't think his next bit is going to be true.
Many publications in geologic literature, peer-reviewed, to show that geologists and geomorphologists who study the surface features of the Earth have measured the erosion of the continents over a long period of time.
Sal, I'm willing to bet Nephilim Free here reads geology peer-reviewed articles about as often as he reads computer science peer-reviewed articles. And from what I've heard of Nephilim Free, I would be surprised if he could read.
And they've come up with some very good averages that are conservative erosion rates. In other words, the actual erosion rates are probably greater than that, but using.
But I'm also sure it's different erosion rates for different sediments and different types of erosion.
The conservative numbers, we're losing about 8 centimeters of the surface of the Earth per 1,000 years, which sounds like a small amount in our lifetime, but we show many examples in our presentations that.
All right, so 8 centimeters for 6,000 years. Now, assuming land wasn't also created, which I believe is incorrect, let's see what that comes down to. That is 48,000 centimeters or 4.8 kilometers. Now, let's look up the surface of the Earth, the circumference of the Earth. Which is 24,901 miles. And how many is, and 40,075 kilometers, which is the unit we want. Which means, after 6,000 years, if this were purely the case, we would now be 40,070 kilometers for our circumference. Yeah.
The erosion of the landforms around the Earth, like arches and coastlines,
Better doing math on the fly.
River valleys and such, is really quite rapid, more rapid than you might think. And these measurements do not correspond to the long ages assigned to the geologic column.
Exactly. Very, very good point.
Yeah, even if you were only losing the circumference of the Earth, which I think you're suggesting, we wouldn't have lost that much.
There's far too much material being eroded into the oceans for the continents to be hundreds of millions of years. Isn't that right? And you can't help but wonder just how many tons of sediment from the continent or from North America, for example, are being dumped in the Gulf Coast by the river, the Mississippi River by itself. It must be.
Actually, I think that actually is known. Let's look that up while we listen to some more.
Enormous, isn't that right?
Yes, this is how you measure this. This is not arm waving. There are geologists and geomorphologists and sedimentologists who diligently have been measuring the sediment load being carried into the major deltas of the world. These are the deltas which deposit the erosion from enormous water.
All right, for those of you who are wondering, the Mississippi River carries roughly 550 million metric tons of sediment into the Gulf of Mexico each year.
Sheds around the country and the continents that they're on. Like you mentioned, the Mississippi Delta, if I had a picture to show you, deposits the erosion from about 1/3 of the entire United States. So if you were to measure the sediment...
Wait, hold on. I caught a sneaky preposition there. And from 1/3 of the continental United States? I don't think where it's from matters, Sal.
Rate of deposition at the base of the Mississippi Delta, which has been measured for decades and decades, you automatically get a measurement, and it's conservative at that, of 1/3 of the erosion of the United States.
Not to nitpick, but how are you automatically getting a measurement unless you're using some sort of automated process to get the measurement? I'd really love to know that.
So you look at the deltas around the world, not just in one place, and you get an overall tally. And this has been tallied up. It's in the literature. And you find that you have about 31 billion tons of sediment, which is eroded rock and soil, being deposited into the oceans per year.
Yes, and how much is being deposited back on land? This isn't a one-way process, Sal, and there's no way as an engineer you don't know this.
Year.
Did you say 1 billion tons?
No, around 30 billion.
Wait, did I say as an engineer? I meant as a geologist.
30 billion tons.
Yes,
Wow.
that's 30 times 10 to the 9th power.
All right, so we're also seeing another interesting fallacy here. He's using the big scary numbers fallacy, not understanding that all of these processes, when carried on a global scale, are going to produce large numbers.
Wow.
Tons per year flowing into the ocean basins. Now, of course, someone could argue, okay, well, maybe your measurements are a little bit off. Again, I say they're
No, even if I accept your measurements, the problem is you're assuming that only erosion is occurring. That's not the way this works out.
they're conservative because they don't measure the bed load that's being carried into the deltas. That's very difficult to measure. This is just
Maybe I should have believed Titan when he said Sal was an idiot.
the suspended sediment load that's being carried in the water. So the erosion rate is really greater, okay?
Right.
I know I've had a recent geochemist or something, who've heard one of my presentations recently and say, oh, well, you can't rely on these measurements and they're variable and all that. Well, they're not variable. They've been being measured for over 50 years around the world by many, many people. I'm not talking about creation scientists necessarily.
Sal, did you just misunderstand what a constant and variable in mathematics are? I am pretty sure the rates are variable and are affected by different processes going on and different events. I'm pretty sure no matter how long they've been measured, the rates of deposit are not constant.
They've been measured by geologists of all sorts.
How long they are measured has nothing to do with whether or not the rates are variable. This is just basic logic.
As a secular geologist and being published for a long time, because erosion is a very important environmental issue.
Yes. And so when we hear a uniformitarianist say, well, they complain, oftentimes when a creationist provides data, hard data about one thing or another, they often complain about it. So, you got that's.
Actually, usually when I hear a creationist use the phrase data, I usually get angry because they're trying to make some sort of information analogy about DNA, and they don't understand that the analogy they're using applies to informatics usually, and in informatics, data, which DNA is in their analogy, is not information. It only becomes information when it is processed in some, usually human-readable way. It's another reason why you shouldn't try to use every single thing labeled science to try to prove your point.
That's your creationist jargon. That's your creationist information. What you're talking about is mainstream geologists.
Oh, absolutely. The great majority of the published papers are by secular mainstream geologists doing their job, and
Right.
I would say
That seemed to be misleading. Yes, the great majority of mainstream published papers are indeed produced by secular geologists doing their job. I note that you're not saying they agree with you. Might there be a reason for that?
creation geologists who had contributed to these numbers are in the very small minority.
Right. So the evolutionist is actually complaining about the scientific data. They're not complaining about uniformitarianism or creationism at that point. They're complaining against science, aren't they? And
Right. And this is empirical measurements. This isn't arm waving and theory.
Complaining against science? Science isn't a dogmatic process. Science welcomes being questioned. If someone wanted to take a look at my data science project I did on the Book of Mormon and tell me my methodology is wrong and could show me why, I'd welcome that. In fact, at some point, I want to return to that and add extra books to it. But that's going to take some time.
Theory and theoretical. I mean, this is empirical measurements, which I said is conservative. One of the main arguments.
Okay, let's go back to some math we did earlier. So, if we had lost 8 centimeters per year over 6 billion years, okay, the Earth would have a diameter of about 4,000 kilometers.
Canards that you hear from.
Wait, yeah, that's about right.
The evolutionary community all the time as a rebuttal to this is, well, don't you know, Mr. Giardina, what kind of geologist are you? Don't you know that there are many mountain ranges around the world in the past have risen to high altitudes and are.
Yes, that's kind of been my objection here. You're assuming geological processes only take things away and never add things somewhere else.
Still continuing to rise.
Right.
Well, of course we know that. That's a given. I mean, you know that we have.
Then why did you spend most of the stream trying to pretend as if it didn't happen?
Measurements on that. Now with satellite measurements and everything, you know, using GPS and such measurements. But
the erosion far outpaces that, doesn't it? The rise of the continental mass.
Okay, now we have a shifting of the goalpost. An actual logical fallacy we can deal with instead of confirmation bias. So, up until this point, you were pretending that erosion processes only work one way. Now you yourself pointed out that it doesn't work that way. So you are trying to backtrack, which is something I usually don't see people do. But perhaps you just realized you misspoke.
Going on in mountains, it just can't possibly keep up with the amount of sediment that's being dumped into the ocean every year. Isn't that right?
Well,
I am assuming the amount of matter, except for some lost to space, because some matter does get lost to space every year, on the Earth remains roughly the same. I am also assuming we don't usually lose a lot of rocks to space.
That's true. The numbers show that it really doesn't keep up with it because all of the continents basically would be level to sea level in about 10 million years.
Wow, that's what I was going to ask you.
Now, I'm not saying that the Earth's 10 million years old, but using the empirical data, if the Earth was in fact a part and parcel to be time, then all the continents, basically, including the raised up mountains and everything, would have been eroded down. Now, if you want to argue that the mountains are rising,
I don't think that works that way. And also, I believe continent formation is much more complex than you're trying to make it out to be here.
Faster than the erosion in places. Okay, I'll grant you that. But here's the deal. Here's the killer, the shot. You know, why do we find sedimentary fossiliferous rocks layered all over the Earth that are still supposedly dated as hundreds of millions of years old, okay, still as a veneer on the continents of the Earth?
Wait, what? I'm sorry, Sal. Was that sentence supposed to make sense? Why do we find fossils all over the Earth? Well, 1, erosion happens very slowly. 2, it seems you're forgetting about a process called uplift. And 3, most of those fossils are buried pretty deep.
So even if that some mountains were rising faster than the general erosion rate.
And at this point, I really wish I had remembered the original video, which is actually a topic I know much more about.
Though that veneer of sedimentary rocks, that's the fossiliferous rocks we find all over the earth, basically, they would be long gone. They would be long gone. In other words, if they were hundreds of millions of years as proposed.
So essentially, this is an argument by nuh-uh. Okay.
Regardless of the fact that the mountains are rising more rapidly than the erosion, the surface veneer on top of those mountains should have disappeared millions of years ago.
Right, exactly. That's a great
Does that make sense?
Yes, sir, it does. That makes a lot of sense.
The surface veneer on top of those mountains should have disappeared millions of years ago. You do realize that the erosion processes that little mountains down to something like the Appalachians, say, which are very old, or the corresponding mountain chain that I believe goes through Scotland, which was once part of the Appalachians, takes millions of years. And the veneer, as you put it, that you see now, was not the veneer that was there 100,000 years ago.
The surface veneer of thousands of feet of sedimentary rock all over the earth is still there, and these rocks are contended to have been around since, some of them 10 million years, 50 million years. Some of these rock layers are dated at 400 million years old, like you get into the Devonian rocks and such of the geologic.
Again, I am not a geologist. I thought the Appalachians would be a good example to counter his point, though, because the Appalachians are old and they're not near any active subduction zones as far as I know.
Column. There's no possible way they could be exposed to erosion, because the entire continent would basically be eroded down to sea level in 10 million.
There is no possible way mountains, which are constantly exposed to the air, wind, and rain, could be eroded down by erosion. Were you just trying to talk fast so no one would think about what you were saying?
Years at current rates of erosion.
Wow, 10 million. That's just a spit in the bucket of time for the uniformitarianists. They think nothing of 10 million years, and yet the continents would be gone in just 10 million years.
Yeah. So even if our measurements are off, I mean, we're talking about, whether it's 15 million or 5 million or 20 million. If our measurements are off a little bit, it still doesn't matter relative to the dates, the preposterous dates of the age of these sediments that are given in the geologic column. I mean, because those dates are many orders of magnitude greater.
Yes, their uniformitarianism can't keep up. There's no way. So the Earth, actually, if there was this imagined deep time of hundreds of millions of years in the past, the Earth.
All right, and if I'm free, I'll give you credit. You just used the subjunctive mood correctly. However, if there was, also would have been correct here, because there was deep time.
Should be a ball of water. Isn't that right? There would be no landmass, right?
Well, there would be land. You could say, that the continents have been rising and eroding, but basically everybody's house would be on Precambrian rock. In other words, there would be no sedimentary rock left long ago.
Has Sal totally forgotten about the existence of earthworms? I'm pretty sure earthworms and other creatures add about 20 inches of soil. I think it's like once a century. I'd have to look the statistic up.
Gone, and everybody's house would be founded on Precambrian and metamorphic, what we call basement rock.
That's very interesting.
That's the basement rock that is below the sedimentary, the Phanerozoic, what's called the Phanerozoic cover of the earth. Everybody would be living on Precambrian basement rock.
Wow. And all of the alleged geologic column of the uniformitarianist with its imagined evidence of evolution going upward through the strata, all that would have been gone long ago. There would be none of that for the evolutionists to even be talking about.
Exactly.
Uniformitarianism would prove. Right.
Exactly. In other words, you would have to distort the numbers, the erosion, the worldwide erosion. You would have to distort it completely, an order or two of magnitude in order to just.
Siri? Thank you, Siri.
Sure thing.
All right, sorry about that. I'm not sure what Siri picked up on.
Justify your position.
Yeah, and so this idea of hundreds of millions of years is preposterous. And when evolutionists point to a fossil and say this shrimp fossil is 450 million years old, or this spider fossil is 50 or 150 million years old, that's preposterous. It couldn't be, because it wouldn't even exist in that way.
Well, that's true. If the time was the deep time was as they proposed, because all those layers would be gone.
Right.
But let me.
I do find it interesting that Nephilim can use the subjunctive mood correctly, and Sal cannot.
Mention this, being that I only have a limited amount of time on your program. Let me just say that for the
Trust me, a limited amount of time on Nephilim Free's program is good to prevent brain damage. Ideally, you should take that down to 0. Because I personally have seen you get something wrong by 140 orders of magnitude.
audience that's watching, we constantly, creationists hear that, well, why do the great majority of scientists believe the Earth is 4.5 billion years old? I mean,
because multiple lines of evidence converge on this one thing that suggests a lower limit for the age of the Earth of approximately 4.5 billion years.
the majority of them can't be wrong, could they?
Trying to use the bandwagon argument to say something is wrong is not necessarily why they are wrong, or if they were wrong, in this case, they're not. Trying to say, like, everyone agrees with this, so it must be right, is a bandwagon fallacy. It doesn't matter how many people believe in something. What matters here is the evidence does not point to a young Earth.
That sounds like a reasonable question, but the simple fact.
No, it doesn't. Because what you're forgetting is why the argument is being said to be wrong is important, not that a lot of people believe in something.
Fact is, there is very, very few scientists worldwide who have any idea how the Earth is dated. How this 4.5 billion years old is.
Well, yeah, most scientists aren't working in that. If you want to consider what I do science, yeah, I have no idea how it's dated. Because it has nothing to do with what I'm studying. Dating rocks has nothing to do with most of the algorithms I'm going to use.
Obtained, nor the hundreds of millions of years assigned to the geologic column. Follow me? There's very few scientists who have any idea how it is. So why do most scientists believe that? They do believe it. That's true. But why? They believe it because they believe most scientists believe it.
Actually, no. The reason I believe it is because I am going to take the overwhelming consensus of a body of experts, which does not include you, by the way, Sal, who tell me that, hey, the Earth is billions of years old. Now, does this mean my reasoning is correct? Not necessarily. And I am willing to accept that I'm wrong if there's enough evidence for that to be overturned. However, what I'm doing is using a heuristic because I cannot study every field of science deeply. And just taking the consensus of an overwhelming body of experts is just an easy way and rational way to go about this, even though we know there are problems with this particular method.
That's the only reason. If you actually ask them, why do you believe that the Devonian strata is 400 million years old and the Jurassic strata with the dinosaur bones is about?
Well, I don't know about you, Sal, but I personally don't have the equipment to do potassium, argon, and uranium dating in my house. Most people don't.
60 million years old. Why do you believe that? They haven't a clue. Now there are thousands.
Well, I can give you a pretty good reason why I believe the universe is over 6,000 years old, and that's because I can go out into the backyard right now and look at a star whose light took over 6,000 years to get here.
Of scientists who have a clue. I mean, they believe in radioisotope dating and such as that, but they are in the minority. Follow me? When you talk about scientists of chemists, engineers, doctors,
Scientists of chemists?
every type of imaginable scientist there are. School teachers who call themselves scientists, etc. There's thousands of different disciplines of scientists, right? Thousands, and but the great of them have no clue as to how the Earth is stated. The bottom line is that
Again, this isn't the problem you're trying to make it out to be.
these radioisotope dating, and we explained this in our presentations very easily. You don't have to be, a rocket scientist to understand that how radioisotope dating works, really.
I bet a lot of rocket scientists, as you put it, don't know how isotope dating works either. You know why? Because most rocket scientists are engineers, first off, and their job is to create rockets that go into space. Their field is physics, and not a sub-branch of physics, which arguably geology is.
But what we show them is that the radioisotope dates must conform to the predetermined evolutionary, what they call the biostratigraphic evolutionary age of that strata and fossils in that strata. In other words, all the geologic column, the various formations and the periods, so-called periods of the geologic column, are dated by the assumption, the evolutionary assumption of the progression, the biostratic progression of fossil evolution. Follow me? And there's a predetermined in their mind a date for that type of fossil and strata. And when they conduct radioisotope dating, it better agree with that predetermined evolutionary date, or it's considered discordant.
And you're making this sound like something that would not be expected on occasion. The word you're looking for, Sal, is an outlier. Outliers exist. Usually, in the processes you're talking about, it's because of contamination. And if you get an outlier, you need to figure out why you have an outlier. There's an analogy here I really like when people try to use carbon dating on things that are like 200,000 years old. Now, let's say you go into a clock store. There's this one beautiful clock, and you look at it, but it has a vastly different time than the rest of the clocks in the store. It doesn't matter how beautiful the clock is. The reason you know that that clock is probably wrong is because all the other clocks in the store are telling you something else. And this is something that young Earth creationists are known to do dishonestly, where they'll send a sample that is too old for carbon dating to be carbon dating and get back an invalid result. There are other scenarios where this isn't quite what happens, but I cannot remember what all of those are.
Toss that number out, don't they?
That's a fancy word meaning throw it in the circular file.
Yeah.
Okay. It's what do you mean by discordant? That's a geology term.
And this is a dangerous implication. Scientists do not necessarily throw out data that does not conform to what they are expecting. Now, for example, I had good reason to suspect that my numbers might have been a little off when I was doing the data science project, and it turned out they were, because this is embarrassing, but every programmer does it. I had forgot that array indexing starts at 0, so I committed an off by 1 error.
Term. That means it doesn't.
That threw off my results. The final results didn't change much, but it could have changed a great deal just because of that off by 1 error.
agree with the evolutionary idea of that. And what I show people is that the sample form, if you were to take a sample and bring it to a typical AMS lab for dating, on the sample form,
Sal, a sample of what?
it asks you to, what do you believe is the date of this sample?
Yeah, they want to know.
This is right on the form. Now, radioisotope dating is supposed to be an independent, absolute dating method, right?
Yeah.
And,
Well, if you bring about a fossil, you can probably use the relative dates and get a range.
and why are they asking the person bringing the sample what they believe the date is?
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
It's right on the form. I show people copies of the form from the University of Arizona in Tucson. But many forms are almost identical. They ask you what is the date, the expected date of the sample. Duh. What do you mean? What is the expected date? You're supposed to be telling me. I'm paying you
Right.
to use fancy radioisotope dating to tell me the date, and you're asking me to tell you what I believe it is.
Wow.
Well, I'm pretty sure if a paleontologist goes out into the field and, let's say, digs up an old porpoise fossil, they have a good idea what the ages should be based on what layer it is in. Because here's another thing you seem to be missing, that if everything was buried by a global flood, things would have been buried in order of density.
I've seen forms like that, actual photocopies of them.
Wait, I think I mean buoyancy, but I have to look it up.
And they do. They exactly as you say. It's preposterous for them to be asking you that when you're paying them to tell you.
Yeah,
It's hilarious.
right. Why? I'll tell you why. Because if the date they come up with does not agree, see, what you have previously envisioned as the evolutionary date of that sample, then it goes around in a circle.
The evolutionary date of that sample. What, are they going out for dinner and a movie?
Again,
There is no such thing as an evolutionary date. There's just a date. Something either is dated to be that old or it isn't.
and is redated or adjusted, or they come up with some reason why it doesn't agree, follow me, and do the process again and tweak it again until it has to agree.
Wow. So
No, I'm pretty sure that's not what happens. If an expected date and a return date are off, I am pretty sure both the lab and the scientist will want to know the reason for that.
they're just fabricating their own ideas right there in the lab and throwing out any date that doesn't concord with what the preconceived evolutionary idea is.
It has to agree with the preconceived evolutionary biostratigraphic age of that.
I'm sorry, Nephilim, but you just said something incredibly stupid, and I can't even think of anything snarky to reply to you.
Because those ages and the fossil assemblages supposedly have been dated now for over 100 years, and they're not going to move off of what they believe is an evolutionary characterization of.
Might that be because we have never seen a recorded instance of radioactive decay rates changing?
Of the various fossil assemblages that they find.
Right. Well, Sal, this is all fascinating stuff. I know you're limited on time. I just asked you to touch upon one more thing before you go, and that would be so when it comes to the flood, a lot of people, they're naysayers and they'll say, "Oh, there's no evidence of the flood." If you could just get somebody's attention for 1 minute and tell them this and this and this are evidence of the flood, they just wouldn't be that way unless there was a global flood. What would you say to such a person?
Well, one of the most convincing pieces of evidence against the global flood to me is the fact that if such an event were to occur, every single species that was on that ark would show evidence of a genetic bottleneck, and a severe one at that.
Well, first of all, it's the distribution of the fossils within these sedimentary rocks. They're all over the world, and wherever we find these fossils, we can see that they're buried rapidly. By examining the rocks
Almost as if being buried rapidly is a condition for fossilization.
that contain the fossils, the type of sediment and the structure of the rocks, we can see that all these fossils, all of them, all over
I don't know, Andrew. I'm thinking maybe Sal was taught math by Terrence Howard.
the world, nearly all fossils that are buried in sedimentary rocks indicate that they were buried very, very rapidly, or they would have never formed fossils in the first place. The very fact that we have billions of fossils.
Right, but they were not buried by a single event, and that's the bit you're missing. In fact, we know things were buried in lava that became fossilized, or rather mud that became fossilized. Oh, I'm going to skip that one because I'm not a geologist and they're making my head hurt.
All over the world in stratified rock that was laid down by water, right? These sedimentary rocks, and everyone agrees, whether you're secular geologist or not, that these fossils were laid down in sediments that were laid down by water, which later hardened.
No, they do not agree they were laid down by water.
Into rock. Okay, that's an agreement with everyone.
No, it isn't, because there are other types of sediment fossils can get buried in rapidly, like, for example, in a landslide.
But the fact is that they were all laid down rapidly and catastrophically. Many of the fossils are also mixed with marine strata.
Yeah.
Now,
Many of the fossils are also mixed with marine strata. If you're implying that, yes, we do find what used to be marine life fossilized on the top of mountains, that is correct. But that is because the mountains used to be underwater. This isn't that hard. We know that geologic processes are still creating mountains today.
not told is like the dinosaurs. You go to museums and they have these dioramas and displays of the dinosaurs, but almost never do you see in a museum the fossils that they have found in the same formation with the dinosaurs. Follow me?
Right.
They find all kinds of modern.
Why would a museum that's trying to attract people to its dinosaur exhibit not put fossils of relatively small animals they found with the dinosaurs? And also, let's think about this further. Why wouldn't the exhibits of land-based dinosaurs include fossils of sea creatures?
Fossils that look almost that can be identified in the genera and the species exactly like modern plants and animals today, right alongside with the dinosaurs, along with marine fossils.
Yeah.
How do we get this mixture of these dinosaurs and marine fossils? And the fossils show no evidence of evolution basically at all. We could identify them today.
Yes. Yeah, so we have nothing but discordant fossils then. When you have
Yes.
mollusks in the same strata as T-Rex,
Exactly.
they're both discordant fossils, aren't they?
Wait, what? When did the first mollusk evolve? All right, the first mollusk evolved. Please do not give me AI results. Google, I did not ask for them. Was about 545 million years ago. All right, the dinosaurs first evolved about 230 million years ago. So maybe the reason we see mollusks in the same strata, we see dinosaurs, even though we don't always find them together, is because mollusks evolved before dinosaurs.
And this is not an exception. If you could argue this is an exception. This is a one-off. This is rare. This is due to.
And I guarantee you, we will not find any mollusks that died off before the dinosaurs evolved in layers that contain dinosaurs.
What they call quote unquote reworking of the strata and stuff like that. No, it's not an exception. This is the rule.
Yeah.
Almost everywhere you go, you find this when you find fossils.
Exactly. Well, I have one last question, Sal. This question.
Please promise that this will really be your last question. Do you have any idea how painful you are to listen to, Nephilim Free?
In sedimentology, where they actually demonstrate how strata,
basically clay particles that are formed all over the earth. They're extensive shale beds and mudstones, what's called mudstones. And it was thought for the last 100 years that has to require
Mudstones. I wonder if they have anything to do with the mud flood.
quiet water, very slow settling out of the clay particles, to form like a 10 or 20-foot shale bed, let's say. That could take 1,000,000 years or 100,000 years. But it's been shown by chemistry and stuff that with turbulent waters and fast-moving waters, even clay particles will flocculate and settle out rapidly, forming shale beds and slate and such as that.
yes, and not only that, but chalk and limestone. The evolutionists argue that these stones are of such vast age, and yet we find fossils in them. So even that can be created cataclysmically,
I am pretty sure that is not true for chalk.
rapidly, and not according to the mainstream idea of what, a couple of centimeters, 1,000 years, or something like that.
Sure, you find it.
So we have two more things going on here that are important for Faulty Logic Fridays. Nephilim Free is cherry-picking the data he likes. Sal, for the last few minutes, has been doing what is known as the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, where he's trying to pick a few studies or data points that support what he's trying to say.
An entire whale fossils, which are huge, in these beds, in diatomaceous earth beds and in other areas around the world. There's quite a few whale fossils been found. Now, these fossils are huge, like dinosaurs. They just can't, drift to the bottom and wait 10,000 years to slowly be covered,
That's ridiculous, yeah.
Yeah, everywhere you look, like I say, it shows that the fossils were laid down rapidly.
Yes. Well, that's all very fascinating, Sal. I wish you had.
Again, rapid burial is a requirement for fossilization. I know nothing about geology, but I know that a global flood isn't the only way you can get rapid burial.
Had more time, I would love. I know you're a busy fellow. I appreciate you coming on here to share some of your knowledge with people. Thank you so much for coming. I won't keep you all night. I know you don't. You told me you don't have a lot of time, but I appreciate the time you've spent here, and I hope that other people will look into. I'm going to provide a link to your website, and I hope people will look into some of the lectures that Sal gives. There are some very interesting videos of him giving some interesting lectures about erosion rates and these.
Yes, and my favorite one is where he says there's a 1 in 10 to the negative 70th probability of something happening, which shows he doesn't understand how exponents are used in math or what the max probability of anything is, because the max probability for a certain event is 1.
I found it fascinating where you were talking about these structures in the American Southwest that are literally collapsing all over the place. And how can that be going on for millions of years? That's very interesting too.
Yeah, we have a lot of articles that you could copy for free. Everything on my website is for the taking. I don't copyright anything. So anyone who goes there, if they want to copy articles for their students, their kids, or themselves, feel free to just copy and paste them. I have trailers which show my presentations.
I am begging anyone who sees this stream, please do not take anything I say or Sal says about geology seriously. Go find a reputable source and check that instead. Sal is passing him off as an expert. I can safely tell you I have never studied geology, and what I know is what a layman layperson knows.
They're like video trailers, so you could always call us and contact us from the website to schedule a creation presentation that you may like
Please do not do that either.
that you see from the
Do not damage people's legitimate educations by inviting this man to your church.
trailers.
Oh, excellent. That's wonderful. So I'll certainly provide a link below this video to your site there so people can do that. And thank you again so much for coming, Sal.
Okay, thank you, Even, for having me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, folks. Thank you so much for coming to watch.
Oh. Okay, thankfully that's the end of that video. I can stop sharing the screen. Alright, I'm sorry, I forgot how painful Nephilim Free was. This was not the video I originally planned, but the best laid plans of mice and men gang after glee, as the poet Robert Burns once said. Hopefully I can actually find some of the videos I've seen of Sal doing absolutely terrible math, but this was not one of them. And I know I've been harsh on Nephilim Free, but that's because I have never heard this man say anything intelligent. Alright, that's it for this stream. I will be back next Friday. Hopefully I'll have some extra time to do some more just scripted videos with simple math problems, because I think the scripted videos work better and I can at least take multiple takes so the sound is better and there aren't as many gaffes in recordings. Go out and write some code.